Hello everyone, welcome to Module 8 of Climate Change course. In this module, we will discuss about the concept and issue around climate change adaptation, which include selection process of adaptation option and some strategy to ensure successful adaptation program. So in general, you will learn about fundamental concept of climate change adaptation, the importance of adaptation and the linkage between climate change adaptation and national development plan, as well as the process and important factor for identifying an effective adaptation option, which include also the stakeholder engagement process. So by the end of this module, you should be able to explain the concept of climate change adaptation and its importance for coping with climate change impact, describe the linkage between climate change adaptation and development planning, and also identify appropriate adaptation options for specific area and context. Well, so what is climate change adaptation? As defined in the third assessment report of the International Panel on Climate Change, adaptation to climate change refers to adjustment in human and natural systems in response to actual or expected climate variation, with a view to moderate harm or explore beneficial opportunity. Or generally speaking, as climate change become more and more pronounced, the ecological, social, and also economic system have to be adjusted to those change and to their effect in order to minimize potential effect. So this adjustment by both natural and human system is known as adaptation. And basically, adaptation to climate change is primarily aimed to reduce the severity of threat that posed by climate change. Somehow, it may also provide a non-climate related co-benefit, such as fostering social learning and also creating a more resilient society. Everyone knows that adaptation to climate change is very important, but in most cases, taking adaptation action can be very expensive. For instance, during the 2009 Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen, various international organizations, including World Bank, UNDP, and the UNFCCC, have estimated that $billions are needed per year for fostering climate change adaptation, especially in the developing country. Although the exact estimate vary among different organizations, but there is a general agreement that around $100 billion per year should be provided for climate change adaptation by 2020. So according to this estimate, taking action for climate change adaptation is very costly. Somehow, we still have to do it, because if we don't take any action, it may result in irreversible damage to our ecosystem and society, which can cause us even higher financial implications. For example, the case of the Mekong Delta area, where around more than 17 million people are living. That area is currently threatened by sea level rise. So in order to adapt with the impact of sea level rise, the Vietnam government may need a huge amount of budget to build coastal protection structure and take other measures to minimize risk of coastal flooding and also land subsidence. But if they don't take any adaptation action from now on, the entire delta system may go underwater permanently, which means that more than 17 million people have to be relocated, which will be a lot more costly and may also provoke many other socio-political issues. Basically, there are various approaches for climate change adaptation that can range from modifying threats, such as building a dam for flood control, to preventing effects and impact like introducing drought-resistant crop and to accepting the loss in case that adaptation measure is too costly. But all in all, those approaches can be generalized into two groups, including the anticipatory adaptation and the reactive adaptation. The anticipatory adaptation refers to any adaptation that taking action in preparation for the anticipated change or the change that is not yet happened. For example, the development of new building code to better protect human settlement under the expected extreme weather. And on the other hand, the reactive adaptation refers to any adaptation option that is taken when climate change effects are already experienced. For example, change in farm practice, such as introducing of additional irrigation measures to cope with drought and the development of new crop variety to cope with salinity and so on. Now let's move on to the process of climate change adaptation. Basically, climate change adaptation is a continuous process which consists of 5 important steps, including observation, impact and vulnerability assessment, selecting of adaptation option, implementation of adaptation measure, and monitoring and evaluation of adaptation action. So the first step to take any adaptation initiative is the observation of climatic and non-climatic, socio-economic and environmental variables. Then the information about all of these variables can be used to assess impact of climate change and related vulnerability. Based on the result of this assessment, appropriate adaptation option can be selected by taking into account different factors such as cost effectiveness, potential co-benefit, and public acceptability. And once an adaptation activity or action is selected, it can be implemented. So after the implementation, monitoring and evaluation of adaptation action is needed in order to help to provide feedback to ensure that adaptation activity are appropriate, effective, or whether it is needed to be revised. Identifying and planning for an effective adaptation is very important, but more of the time it has a lot of challenge, including the challenge to get reliable and high quality data and information that are needed for each step of the process. So for example, climate data and other data on environment are required in assessing potential climate change impact. Similarly, socioeconomic data and scenarios provide the idea about vulnerability and adaptive capacity of the affected community or affected region. Therefore, they are also needed in the adaptation planning process. And the information about relevant policy, plan, and strategy at various levels are also important to make sure that adaptation activity are aligned with other existing national development plan. So in short, we can say that this information and data are really important in adaptation planning process. But the problem is those data sets are not always available, especially in the developing country. Another important point to consider while planning for climate change adaptation is the necessity of effective stakeholder engagement. The important stakeholder for climate change adaptation planning process include community member, policymaker, researcher and expert, NGO, and also private sector. Each of these stakeholders play an essential role in designing and implementing adaptation activity. For example, they can provide important information about local circumstances, provide technical and financial support, and thereby contribute to a more effective planning and likely to enhance the acceptance of decisions made for the adaptation option and activity. Selecting adaptation option is very important step in the climate change adaptation planning process. In general, a variety of adaptation options are available, ranging from traditional development activity to a more specific adaptation measure. However, those adaptations fall between two approaches, including the vulnerability focus and impact focus. The vulnerability focused adaptation primarily aim to eradicate the root cause of vulnerability. For example, poverty and other non-climatic pressure that make people become vulnerable. It is somehow overlapped with the traditional development support and often represent the foundation of climate change adaptation. The impact-focused adaptation, on the other hand, are any adaptation options that seek to address the impact associated exclusively with climate change. This adaptation activity fall outside the scope of traditional development support, and therefore it is generally require new and additional adaptation measures. Actually, there are 4 types of adaptation action that fall between the two approaches, including the action that aim to address or eradicate the driver of vulnerability, the action that aim to build response capacity of the affected community, the action that improve management of climate risk by incorporating climate information into decision-making process, as well as the activity that confront with climate change impact directly to minimize the potential of the impact. So for all adaptation action, whether it is vulnerability focused or impact focused, it cannot be separate from the national development activity, as it is closely linked to the sustainable development practice, such as maintaining ecosystem, integrated water resource management, disaster risk reduction, and so on. So here are some examples of each type of adaptation option. For example, for the option that aim to address driver of vulnerability, Bangladesh has adopted this adaptation option to cope with the impact of flooding. So instead of building control structure to prevent flood, which is more on impact-focused strategy, they diversify livelihood strategy to leverage economic potential of the affected population in order to reduce their vulnerability to flood events. And for the option that focus on building response capacity, Brazil has adopted a participatory reforestation strategy to combat with the impact of flood-induced landslide. This kind of adaptation action is primarily aimed to build response capacity of the affected community by reducing their sensitivity to expected landslide hazard. And for the adaptation option that aim to manage climate risk, for example, the case of climate change impact on agriculture in Mali, Mali government has adopted a kind of risk management approach to cope with the impact of climate variation on the agricultural sector. So, for instance, in order to cope with the impact of climate variation on crop productivity, they teach their farm to collect and integrate climate information into their planting decision, which help to reduce risk of crop loss due to climate variation. Then for the last option, in the case of Indonesia, in response to a widespread of coral bleaching incident that caused by global warming, they adopt an impact-focused adaptation option by taking action that lead to improve management of coral reef ecosystem in order to reduce the impact intensity. So among all the 4 adaptation options, there are no clear boundary to say which option is the best in general, because the impact of climate change vary geographically and also depending on the socio-economic and political context of the affected community. Therefore, adaptation options should also be selected appropriately according to those contexts and geographical situation. Given the range of possible adaptation options available, it is very important to evaluate each option and make a careful comparison before deciding which option should be selected for a specific case. This is because wrong adaptation action is not only ineffective to cope with current impact, but it can also create further negative influence on the affected system. So showing in this slide are the most commonly used method to compare adaptation options. This include cost-benefit, cost-effectiveness, and multi-criteria evaluation method. So basically, each method has both advantage and disadvantage, and suitable for different contexts or the project. So for the cost-benefit method, it provides a good analysis and allow quantification of both project cost and benefit in terms of monetary. Therefore, it enables quantitative comparison of cost and benefit between different adaptation options. On the other hand, the cost-effectiveness method allows an analysis to be carried out on non-monetary costs and benefits, such as health and ecosystem service. So it leads to differentiate the adaptation option by project cost and efficiency. But the weakness of this evaluation method is that the analysis result cannot be easily justified. And for the third method, the multi-criteria evaluation method, the analysis can be carried out flexibly, and the analysis criteria can also be optimized to the national and local priority, and also allow for stakeholder engagement. However, it might be possible to evaluate only the monetary benefit of the project because the other factors are not quite easy to quantify, because normally the required data set are not always fully available. So regardless of what evaluation methods you will use to compare different adaptation options, each option must be carefully evaluated. So in general, an ideal adaptation option must be easy to be implemented, effective enough to cope with current impact without provoking further negative consequences on the natural environment and society, and it should also be long-lasting without risk and uncertainty. So when deciding for an adaptation option, you must carefully consider some important aspects as given in this slide. So first of all, you should consider whether the selected adaptation option can be sustained. So normally, to ensure that an adaptation option is applicable for long run, it must be achievable at low cost, provoke no harm to the environment, and provide equal benefit to the affected community. Additionally, it should also has a potential for mitigating climate change at global scale, in addition to minimize the specific impact locally or regionally. Then an ideal adaptation option must be reliable and effective enough to moderate existing impact in a timely manner. It should contain no risk and uncertainty that may result in project failure or further negative impact at later stage of project implementation. And finally, an ideal adaptation option should not be technically surpass individual and institutional capacity of the affected community, and it must be accepted by all stakeholders, especially by the local community. And as a bonus point, an ideal adaptation option should also enable a new business opportunity that lead to enhanced livelihood and create resilience for the affected area. Now let's discuss about the adaptation options that have been developed to deal with both current and anticipated impact of climate change on different socio-economic sectors. So everyone knows that the impact of climate change vary from place to place and also sector to sector. So the adaptation measures also vary accordingly. But all in all, we can say that for whatever type of the impact and sector, adaptation measures can be made through three kinds of action, including technical or engineering approach, market tool, and policy instrument. Where policy instrument is generally cannot be absent because it serves as the backbone that supports and sustains adaptation action. In addition, there is no exact borderline to define whether which method is the best, because each of them is best for different type of impact under different socio-economic circumstances. So for agricultural sector, common adaptation methods include development of new crop variety that is more resistant to climate-related threats such as drought, salinity, and insects, introduction of new cropping techniques such as diversification and intensification methods that help to deal with soil erosion problem, improve soil nutrient, and also increase productivity. Change in fertilizer type and application technique, as well as change in planting and harvesting schedule to cope with climate variability, and improve soil and water management to increase resource use efficiency, development of early warning system to help reduce impact of undesirable climatic event, and also enforcement of related policy such as subsidy and training program to increase community capacity that lead to minimize the vulnerability level. So for water resource sector, it is generally accepted that climate change poses a varying or negative impact on our water system, from changing precipitation pattern to flood, drought, water pollution, sea level rise, and also to various water-related disasters. So this is natural that adaptation measures for water resource sector are available in a great spectrum in order to deal with different type of impact. So for instance, to adapt with water shortage issue, various adaptation options which comprise planning for water allocation, increasing water storage capacity, and securing water supply through alternative source, for example, rainwater harvesting, might be taken. Then to cope with other impacts such as flood impact, different measures including construction of flood control system, diversification of livelihood resource, and development of early warning system may be the potential adaptation option. For education sector, the impact of climate change on education sector is quite abstract compared to its effect on other sectors such as water resource and agriculture. But integrating climate change adaptation into education sector is utmost important and can provide substantial positive influence on impact mitigation for long run. The approach to adapt with climate change for education sector includes promoting awareness on climate change and related concerns by integrating climate change issue into the program curriculum and provide related training to teacher and curriculum developer to strengthen their capacity. Reducing impact of climate variation on access to education by constructing or improving learning facility to withstand the impact of climate-related disaster and so on. So in previous slide, we have learned about various adaptation measures as well as the strategy for evaluating and comparing different adaptation options. And of course, we can say that choosing an appropriate adaptation option is very important for climate change adaptation planning. But the other important factor to be considered to ensure that adaptation program is successful is to make sure that it is well aligned with the National Development Roadmap. So basically, in some situations, a standalone adaptation measure can be effective, but in most cases, adaptation measures need to be implemented as part of a broader collection of measures within the existing development frameworks. So this is because climate change adaptation and development policy commonly have the same goal. In such a case, climate change adaptation can positively influence the development policy, and the development policy can provide a good framework that supports adaptation action. So in that sense, integrating climate change adaptation into a development policy will enhance effectiveness of adaptation project and can make it sustainable for a long-term perspective. So as a good example that emphasize the relationship between climate change adaptation and development plan, and why it is important to integrate climate change adaptation in the existing development plan, is the overlap between climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction program. So as you can see in this slide, the disaster risk reduction strategy covers the non-climatic related disaster such as earthquake, and also address climate-related disasters such as flood, drought, storm surge, and all other risks that are associated with climate change. So this means that adaptation to climate-related risks, for example, to flood, will enhance disaster risk reduction process. Likewise, improving existing disaster risk reduction plan will also be relevant to climate change adaptation as well. Another important aspect to consider when planning for successful climate change adaptation is the challenge during the implementation stage. So basically, implementing climate change adaptation cannot be done by a single institution and normally require a tremendous effort for both financially and technically. So therefore, most common challenge including financial constraint, lack of coordination among different stakeholders, and lack of institutional capacity. So as a rule of thumb, to ensure successful adaptation program, this challenge must be properly taken into account during the planning process. So now we have reached the last slide of this module. And up to this point, I believe you should at least learn that climate change adaptation is any action that aims to moderate climate impact or to seek for new beneficial opportunity to cope with climate variation. And that adaptation action to climate change must be designed to suit with the sector need and socio-economic context. And that monitoring and evaluation of adaptation action is necessary to provide feedback and to ensure that adaptation activities are appropriate and effective. And also, you should understand that climate change adaptation can strongly influence on the national development plan. Therefore, it must be integrated into the existing national development roadmaps. So now let's call it a day, and I will see you again in the next module.